F. A-18 Super Hornet, deployed from aircraft carrier USS George H.W. Bush in Arabian Gulf, an F-A-18 Super Hornet fighter jet launched from the aircraft carrier USS George H.W. Bush, CVN-77, as the giant warship sailed in the Arabian Gulf on a scheduled deployment under the United States Navy's Fifth Fleet. This operation not only symbolizes the U.S. military presence in the strategic region, but also part of a mission with humanitarian and national defense dimensions. USS George H.W. Bush Deployment Mission. USS George H.W. Bush, a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier named after the 41st President of the United States, is one of the most powerful assets in U.S. naval power. At nearly 333 meters long, this aircraft carrier can carry dozens of fighter aircraft, surveillance aircraft, and support helicopters. On this deployment, the aircraft carrier is under the command of the U.S. Fifth Fleet, headquartered in Bahrain. The Fifth Fleet is responsible for maritime surveillance and operations in the strategic region encompassing the Arabian Gulf, Red Sea, Gulf of Oman, and parts of the Indian Ocean. This region is known as a vital route for international trade, including major global energy shipping routes. The role of the F-A-18 Super Hornet. The F-A-18 Super Hornet fighter jet is the backbone of U.S. carrier air power. This multi-role aircraft can function as both an air-to-air fighter and an air-to-ground attack aircraft. In this operation, the Super Hornet plays a strategic role in conducting precision airstrikes against terrorist targets in Iraq, supporting humanitarian operations by providing air cover for aid delivery routes, ensuring the security of U.S. personnel and interests in conflict zones. The launch of the Super Hornet from the deck of the USS George H.W. Bush demonstrates the U.S. Navy's readiness to respond to threats posed by terrorist groups, particularly ISIS, presidential authority, and U.S. Central Command. The President of the United States has directly authorized U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, to conduct military operations in this region. This authority encompasses two main aspects: humanitarian aid delivery, providing air cover for the distribution of logistics, food, and medicine to civilians affected by the conflict in Iraq; targeted airstrikes, conducting limited military operations to weaken ISIS's position, specifically to protect U.S. troops, diplomats, and strategic American facilities in the region. Responding to the ISIS threat, the terrorist group Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant ISIS was carrying out brutal actions that threatened regional stability and international security. ISIS not only targeted the Iraqi government but also committed violence against minority groups and civilians. The decision to deploy the aircraft carrier USS George H.W. Bush and launch the Super Hornet was a strong signal that the United States would not remain silent in the face of this threat. This military operation was designed to reduce ISIS's combat capability, securing key areas in Iraq, protecting U.S. political, military, and humanitarian interests, symbol of U.S. naval presence. Beyond operational aspects, the presence of the USS George H.W. Bush in the Arabian Gulf also symbolizes the U.S. military's presence and commitment to stability in the Middle East. This aircraft carrier, with thousands of personnel, functions as a floating city capable of conducting large-scale air operations on a continuous basis. Through the presence of the combat fleet in air operations, the U.S. Navy emphasizes its commitment to collaborating with international partners, ensuring the security of global trade routes, and protecting civilians from the threat of terrorism. Military documentation. Video of the A-18 Super Hornet launch from the deck of the USS George H.W. Bush was recorded and published by U.S. Navy Mass Communications Specialist, Master Sergeant David Lee. This documentation demonstrates the readiness and professionalism of the U.S. military in carrying out missions in a high-risk theater of operations.
Christopher and Todd Rudberg, they'll be taxiing by, and you can give them...